Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review A Bad Samaritan. So, I loved how smart this movie was. I really liked also how unique it was. It might have been simple for some people, but at the end of the day, I enjoyed it. So, what is Bad Samaritan about? Well, come to find out, it has a very odd beginning part of this film that eventually doesn't get back to it until like towards mostly to the end of the film of what the heck that visual was that didn't quite make sense. But within this story, we have Sean, who's this struggling artist who is to become a valet by night. And Sean, of course, is to go on, and while doing this valet job, he is stealing from people. He's doing these small thefts that supposedly no one is to possibly remember these items being stolen. But they only steal from a-hole people or guys that are guys or people that of course are mean. So Sean goes on and is to steal from this one guy, and come to find out Sean is to steal from the wrong man, a guy named Kale, who will eventually see through the rest of this movie after this point. So Sean is to go on and uncover a woman who is tied up within this home, and he is to want to go on and try to step up and do the right thing. But when Sean is to try to do anything but actually untie this girl right then and there and get her out of there, anything else that Sean is to go on and do, call the police, get a detective on the case, call the FBI, no one believes him because of his record. No one really is to think that this guy is telling them the truth. So it kind of feels very much like Disturbia. When we go on, we have Shia LaBeouf in the Disturbia movie, who is to find out one of his neighbors is possibly killing people or doing some shady things. And Shia LaBeouf is to try to go on and convince people that this guy is doing something shady, to the point of him going to an extreme measure to prove that. And then eventually, guess who's coming to dinner within that film? I will mention to some people, there is like a couple of jump scares here and there that actually did, like, oh man, like these jump scares are actually interesting, good. Like I thought I was going to be like bored throughout this film, but come to find out I wasn't. There's like 2 or 3 maybe jump scares throughout this whole film. So if you jump scare easy, then sorry, but like it is what it is. So immediately with this film, I would have to say that this was so creative, and we also have this kind of like revenge thing where when Sean was to try to steal from Kale, we have Kale that is to figure things out and seek revenge upon Sean. And this movie gets really interesting really fast. So yeah, like there's some brutal moments, but again, there is like, man, this movie like, and there's nothing Sean can do. There's like, how is he gonna go on and get even with this guy who seems to have like a much more kind of intelligence than Sean does, like a way of which to technologically ruin Sean's life in one way or another. So, as if like Kale has been planning this for years, knowing that this would probably happen. So yeah, so we have it to where Sean is wanting to try to step up and do the right thing, but it seems that he's going to be the only one who, at the end of the day, is going to play hero in this story. So, with that said, how would I grade this movie? I would definitely have to say that it's like a solid, good movie, even though there is some goofy scenes here that I'm like, okay, this is weird. Or like the whole like like there's certain scenarios that we find this girl in that is kind of unsavory, but like I just felt like this movie was so creative, so interesting. Um, Kind of reminded me of the movie like Shattered a little bit. The movie where we go on and we have the girl who is with the guy and they're in love, and the guy is like, "Oh man, like I'm rich and now I have this girl." Come to find out, eventually, this guy is going to regret ever meeting this woman within that movie. But check out Shattered if you haven't. I've reviewed it, so go ahead and check out that review. Anyways, so where can you go and find this movie? Well, it's actually on certain apps that you can rent it for cheap, but I'm also going to hope to give you certain apps that you can go and find and possibly watch this movie for free. So with that said, first off, Vudu and Amazon, I think, is to have this right now for $2.99. So if you're looking for like a cheap movie to rent, you can probably check out those locations. Or because like I was trying to like find like this movie because I wanted to just watch it, but then I was like, oh yeah, there's just a renting way of doing things. But I'll also give you a couple apps that I've been using over time. So with that said, going onto a Google search, you may find all three of these apps. I would say eventually download them so you can be able to watch a number of apps for absolutely free. So with that said, first one is letter C, so just one of these. So C Movies app. You can go into a Google search. Hopefully you can be able to find this app, download it, and be able to see premium access stuff, exclusive apps, like a whole bunch of stuff all in one app. So you can see a bunch of stuff for absolutely free. Fox HD Movies. Regardless of what I say next, more than likely this may be able to have a way to say they can find this app a little bit better. The logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say something different. It'll say Play 1080p HD Movies. So yeah, you can possibly go on and find this app through a Google search and download it and be able to see this movie and as well as a number of other things for absolutely free. And this one is kind of tricky because I had it on a Google Play Store, but when I went to search this like recently, I was like, oh, this is another one of those where it no longer exists on a Google Play Store. When I went to search it, I was like, great, like this freaking sucks. So you can go through a Google search and search two words, TV Crush. You'll be able to find a link to something that says like HD Movies 1, 2, 3, and eventually that is what TV Crush is now. It has this HD Movies with a king crown off the side. You can hopefully download that app and be able to see a bunch of stuff for absolutely free. Maybe Bad Samaritan, maybe a number of other things. So with that said, now that I've gotten that all the way, solid, good movie. I enjoyed like the build up of this film, and I thought it was just rather fun. So with that said, let's go on to that double five time territory. Let's get into more specifics about this film because it's about that time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to do spoil this movie. So we have Sean. Sean in the beginning of this film, because we have this kind of weird visual that like I just thought it was weird how it went into this film, because in the very beginning of this movie we have this horse that is being kind of beaten down by some young kid, and some woman is saying like, stop, like you're killing it, stop, and then they do nothing with that scene until eventually later on, I guess that was like Kale's first attempt at doing what he was doing. So, but we transition here. So we have Portland, Oregon. Sean is to be this artist, and he's trying to like perfect these pictures and try to get them to look just right. So all of a sudden we have this girl who is to be Riley that appears at Sean's door and is mentioning like, well, sir, would you like to know about the good word today? And Sean's like, no, like I have no interest in that at all. And then Riley's like, well, would you like me to go on and just jump your bones? And Sean's like, well, I guess. So Riley just comes in and they're kissing, and come to find out, like, both these people are boyfriend and girlfriend. It's the weird introduction of a character that I actually found to be really just funny. And I wish that there was stuff like that in the movie all the time, just to, like, people to like, what? I'm so confused. So we go on. We have Sean, who is starting to unclothe Riley and start taking pictures of her, and she is to flash him at one point, and he is to take a picture of it. And so she's like, well, hey, like, I like delete that photo because I don't like pictures of that like getting out. And he's just like, well, it's like it's of you and you're beautiful and this and that. So Riley's like, okay, but you need to like keep that picture to yourself. So we have Sean that eventually is fixing all these pictures, and so Riley is looking at him. She's like, oh man, like how'd you get that guy to like smile? And Sean is like, well, I'd offer him a bunch of food and stuff. It's like, oh, okay. So we transition from Sean speaking to Riley and talking to her to Sean going on and meeting with his parents. And so Sean is to have this cluster in his back part of his vehicle of a number of jewelry and stuff like that. Sean is to go and find this clatter ring and give this to his mother. So Sean is to say, oh, happy birthday, Mom. Here's this clatter ring. And so, because Sean, of course, is a thief technically, so he has just a bunch of furniture or jewelry laying around in the back of his car for special occasions. So Sean is talking to his mother and his father, and we, of course, have Sean's father that's asking him, it's like, well, hey, like, how is it that you could afford, like, that kind of jewelry on your salary? And shouldn't you go on and get a real, like, professional photographer job? Like, I would line up for you. And Sean's like, no, like, I like what I'm doing. And plus also, like I like that I'm kind of more like freelance and this and that. So Sean, after going on and having, of course, his father's acceptance of what, of course, he has to do for his life, we then transition again to have Sean, who needs to go to work soon. So Sean, of course, is to go to his valet job, and we, of course, have him and Derek, who are valets that have kind of bumped their price of their valet fee to $3. And we have the owner of this restaurant who's valeting for them. It's like $3? It's like, shouldn't you guys have it at $2? Like, that was pricey enough to like just do this for $2. And they're like, no, like it'll be fine. So the restaurant owner is like, okay, sure. So Sean and Derek are starting to take certain valets, and the first family that they go on and they are to have the valet be done from, it seems like they were nice. It seems like Sean noticed some little thing about like their kid, and like, you're probably gonna need that. And the girl's like, yeah, like thank you. So we immediately have Derek that jumps in and wants to steal from this family right away, and Sean's like, no, like those people were actually nice. Like, how about we just kind of park their car and just kind of let it go? And Derek's like, no, man, like, I want to do this. I want to do this job, and I want to take a couple things. So Sean's like, okay, but I'll get the next one. So Derek is to come back, and so now Sean is up. Sean is to see this kind of this Maserati guy, and and so Kale is to pop out of this car and is to immediately just tell these guys like all kind of garbage. Is like, hey, don't touch my car. Hey, like, don't even look at it. Like this and that. And so Kale is really reaming these guys, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna steal from this freaking guy. Like, definitely, we're gonna clean him out. So Sean goes and takes this vehicle and is to find out that it has navigation, and so he makes his way back to Kale's home. So Sean is to go on and look through this guy's house because garage door opener, there's no alarm. So Sean goes on and starts looking through this house, and he's like, wow, it must be nice to be a rich guy. So Sean goes on and is to make it through these rooms and is to find out that there's a brand new credit card that they can go and rip off. And we have to where Derek is like, oh my god, I'm gonna buy like so many like iPads now and like and pawn them all off. And Sean's like, yeah, it's gonna be great. So like I can take Riley to Malibu and just and Derek's like, yeah, I'm gonna move out of my house. All the things that they're thinking that they're gonna go on and do. So we have Sean that is to continue to make it through this guy's place and activate this card. He's to try to locate where this phone is, and so he finally finds it. He activates this card, and so Sean is to notice that there's a room that has this lock on it. And Derek's like, heck yeah, like that's gonna be a room that is gonna have like fortune and whatever. Like this room that is gonna have all of this stuff on it, believe you me. So Sean is to pick this lock, make it into this room, and Derek's thinking that that Sean is gonna have plenty of time. So Sean opens this room and is to make his way to this desk where he finds this guy's checkbook, and so he clicks a screenshot of this guy's, or a camera shot from his phone of this check. But when he goes on and does that, he also notices that there's a woman tied up in this room. So he's like, oh my god, there's a woman tied up in this room. And Sean is also noticing in the room that there is a bunch of garbage bags that are all around this room. And he's like, oh my god, like this is like a kill room. So Sean is to now try to unlatch this girl that is to have this gag over her mouth, and is to realize that this girl is pretty well tied into this room, like bolted to the floor, and there's a whole bunch of straps and a whole bunch of things that she can't easily get out of. Like, this guy has really planned this all through. So come to find out, this girl is Katie. So Sean is thinking like, well, hey, like I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna like rescue this girl, it's the right thing to do. And so Sean is to run down to the garage and find these bolt cutters to help this girl, as well as him spotting this other room that is to really just be a room that has a bunch of like medical table and chainsaw and all these things. And Sean was like, oh my god, like if I don't rescue this girl, she's going to be chopped up. This is awful. So we have Sean that is to race back into the room, and we also have Katie that's telling Sean that there's a camera in the room, but it has to be activated because Kale has the ability to like have this like smart house, smart cars, smart everything, where he can just hit a button on his phone and the lights all come on in this house. So we have it to where Sean is running back into this to try to make it in this room, and all of a sudden he realizes that the light turns on in the room before he enters it, and he's like, oh crap. So, because we have it, of course, where Kale is to now look at Derek, be like, where's my car? Give me my car, like I'm ready, like my meal is over. Where's my, where's my, where's my keys, and where's my vehicle? So now Derek is saying like, well, hey, I have another family here, and then I'll get your car, Kale, and then you'll be on your way. So Derek is trying to stall. So we have Sean that is to buckle here, and he's telling Katie, it's like I'll come back for you, like I promise. And so he runs off and is to just take this car, drive back to this restaurant, hand this car off to Kale, and then is to decide later that he like felt sick about that whole thing. And so Sean tells Derek what it all had happened, and that Sean wants to go on and do the right thing because he, of course, wants to, like, he regretted not going and saving that girl. So Sean eventually, after his shift is over, he drives his car to the location where Kale's home was, and Sean had called the police stating that there was a woman inside who is to be chained up. So Kale was to go on, and when he was making his way home, he started to notice that his room, or his car, felt like weird. And Kale was to go home and start to realize that his like house felt weird. So the more and more Kale was to just feel uneasy about this, the more that he just decided like, okay, like time to scramble some and go to my plan. So all of a sudden, while Sean was to call the police arrive, Kale is to have a woman present in his house that is not chained up, is not tied up, is some possible prostitute or just some kind of booty call that he had lined up. And I guess the whole yelling of the matter was over these two people. So these police officers were making their way to this house, and Kale and this woman were being questioned. Nothing was to go about it. The police eventually leave. So we have it where Kale is kind of looking around his neighborhood to see a car that looks suspicious or out of place. And he ends up seeing Sean's car, and Sean is to kind of duck under, waiting for this guy to leave. So all of a sudden, we have it where Derek is to make it into Sean's car, like, hey man, what happened? And Sean's like, yeah, the police did nothing. They left. So we see that Kale is driving off, and Derek and Sean are hiding in his car. So Sean and Derek decide that they're going to break in to rescue this girl, and all of a sudden, excuse me, all of a sudden they realize that Kale had quickly cleaned up everything. Everything. Sean and Derek are going into the room where the girl was missing, and come to find out, Kale had completely cleaned that entire room to where there was no black bags there, there was no girl being tied up there, there was no evidence of anything ever happening. And this just looked like a normal desk room, and Sean and Derek are baffled by this. And so now Kale is to turn around and call the police, saying that there is a breaking and entering going on in his home, and now the cops are being sent again to possibly go and chase after these thieves. And so Sean and Derek are now running out of this house, and they're running into the backyard, into the woods, just trying to get the heck out of there. And the police like lost these guys within this woods. So we now have it where Derek is driving off Sean and saying like, "Hey man, like we'll get your car later." And come to find out, Kale is to now have Katie tied up in the back of the seat. And so, because we have Kale who is transferring this girl to another location. So, Kale is to have this like cabin in the middle of nowhere. So, Kale is to take this girl, Katie, and put her in this cell that I guess he somehow made. And because I guess justifiably he might have gotten like this cage for this horse and whatever, but then converted it for an actual person. So we have Kale taking Katie to this location and is instructing her to do specific things like wash herself in a certain manner, to use shampoo in a certain manner, so on and so forth, because Kale is to go on and say that he likes order. So we go on and we have Kale who makes it back to his place the next day and is to see Sean's car still located within this area. Kale, of course, doesn't realize it's Sean's car, but it's the only one that sticks out. So Kale is to put this tracker underneath Sean's car without him realizing it. So Kale is to go on and get pictures of the guy that had tried to rob him the night before. And so Kale is showing the pictures to this girl saying, like, "This is the guy that tried to save you last night, wasn't it?" And she is really just saying not much of anything. And Kale's like, "Good." Like, all right. So we have Sean that is wanting to try to step up, do the right thing. So Sean is to go to the police station and try to do the right thing. And Derek is saying like, "No, you're gonna go to prison, man." And Sean's gonna say like, "Hey man, I'm not gonna say that you were with me. I'm gonna say I did this alone. But like, I'm not gonna lie anymore. I'm gonna do the right thing. Talk to whoever I need to talk to get this girl saved. Because who knows how long this girl's gonna still be alive." So Sean goes to this police station, talks to this detective. The detective goes on and is to make it to Kale's house and is to knock on the door. Nobody's there. The detective starts looking around. So we also had Sean, who was to place these bolt cutters that he was to try to save this girl with, but then chickened out. Sean was to drop these bolt cutters underneath Kale's car. So, underneath Kale's car seat, which he never saw. So, this detective is making it into Kale's home after Kale is to surprise him from behind. Like, "Do you need any help, officer?" It's like, "Yeah, do you own this house?" "Yeah." So, the detective is going on and stating that there was a number of break-ins and, like, can this man go into looking in Kale's house? And he's like, "Well, sure, of course he can." So the detective starts going on into the very room that Sean was to say, like, someone had been, like, tied up there. And we have this detective looking around, and he's like, "Yeah, like, there's no real evidence that shows like this guy, whatever he did everything really quickly." So this detective goes into this garage and eventually is to notice that there is one bolt cutter missing. And he's like, well, yeah, I guess you had a perfect set besides that one missing thing. And Kale all of a sudden is like adjusting one of these pliers, and Kale's is like, yeah, I'm sorry that you saw that, like that one little mistake. So the detective goes on and is to realize that there's this small room also in this garage. He opens it and notices that it's spotless, it's empty. And you would have thought that like the detective might have been putting two and two together to just like, why does this guy have like this secret room in his garage? Why does this guy like, I don't know, there's some just like weird about the whole like tool thing, but like the detective doesn't put anything together because like he doesn't really have anything to just like create real suspicion here. So the detective's like, okay, well, like I guess this whole search is over. Like best of luck on you. So Sean is now asking the detective, did he find anything? And so the detective's like, no, like I should arrest you for filing a false report. And Sean is like, really? Like that? This guy, like he went on and did all this stuff, and the detective's like, there isn't any evidence of that. There's nothing that could say that he did this. So, in that, if there is any thefts that go on even near that area, the detective is going to immediately like think that it's Sean who's doing any thefts. So, come to find out, one of the valeted people are to go on and realize that their house had technically been broken into because a window had been cracked. As well as also, when Derek was to try and steal from this family that was actually nice, Derek was to find that there was a dog within that house, and so he ran out of it because, like, he didn't realize there was going to be a dog in that house, so he couldn't steal anything. So, with that said, Sean is to still try to do the right thing. So he basically just nicks the whole like detective, and we now have it to where the detective is telling Sean, it's like, well, hey, if you want to file a missing person report, like go to the FBI. So now Sean is going to the FBI of all places to file this missing persons report, and he's to have this photo of Katie from the time that he took that screenshot of that checking account. So we have the FBI girl who is kind of very unsure whether or not like she's going to be able to really do anything. But all of a sudden, it seems like the photo that Sean had was to technically be tied to some case that dealt with leather, and like it was something kind of familiar from some case that they had. And so now we have this FBI detective that it's like, like there's something that I can't quite put my finger on about this. And I don't know, like I think we might have something here. So, and they're kind of looking into Kale. They're doing an investigation about Kale and seeing how many different locations that it can possibly have, and they're trying to narrow things down. So, while that's going on, we have a tracker on Sean's car. And so after Sean is to get out of this FBI building, Kale is laughing at Sean as he's in agony, as he's banging on his car, and he's like, God, like, no one can help me. Kale's like, because Kale is tempted to have this needle and take Sean right here now, but instead, Kale wants to F with this guy to get even. So, Kale is to now go on and follow Sean to his home. And Kale is to, while Sean is showering, hold his gun out to want to fire upon Sean in the shower, but he pretends to fire. But instead, he goes through all of Sean's stuff and is to have everything be downloaded from Sean's computer to now Kale's stuff, so we can have Kale kind of eventually figure out every single bit of information from Sean to really mess up his life. Because that's his plan. We also have Kale, who's noticing some pictures of Sean's girlfriend. He's like, like, you shouldn't have left this either. So, Kale now goes on and is to find out when Kale is to go through Sean's Facebook, who his girlfriend is, who his family is, and is to find out who his friends are, and all kinds of things. So, first off, Sean is to want to go on and meet up with Riley, and he's asking her, it's like, well, hey, like, could you just come with me? Like, I just need you. And Riley's like, well, I'm sorry, Sean, but I have to go to class. Like, I have a really big, like, thing that's going to be like a third of my grade. I have to go. So Sean's like, well, okay. Like, all right, just, like, class is important. I get it. Go on and go. So Riley, while she's going on in this classroom, going through this presentation, happens. So Kale, all of a sudden, is to be on Sean's Facebook and is to type the words, "It's over, bae." And so Kale goes on and is to release to all of Riley's friends and all of her people this photo of her when she had flashed before. And so now, all of a sudden, Riley is to find this photo, and she is to run in tears out of this classroom. And we have Riley who calls Sean. It's like, I don't know why you could have done anything like this, but, like, it's over. How could you? So Sean is like, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything. To where even the point where Sean is running to trying to just talk with Riley, and her best friend, Josie, or no, Jacqueline, who's actually from Superman and Lois as Chrissy. And I was like, oh my god, like, hey, like, small world. So Jacqueline, who's played by Sophia, is trying to be like this, like, hey, no, like, you can't get to her, like, don't speak to her. And so we have Sean who's like, okay, well, I guess I can't talk to Riley. So we have, at one point, Riley and Jacqueline, who are leaving for the day and going out somewhere, and all of a sudden Riley is to be attacked by this guy and thrown down this, like, this staircase shaft, and Jacqueline is to look on as Riley's now injured. And so come to find out, Sean is to eventually get a call from this hospital saying that Riley is in the hospital because, like, this was her emergency contact, her next of kin kind of thing. So Sean goes to this hospital and is to try to convincingly tell Riley what had happened, and she writes this piece of paper that says, "Go away." And so Sean is like, oh my god. But there's a bunch of other things that also leads up to that too. So we have Sean and we have Derek, who are possibly going to their job at Nino's. That's the restaurant. So Derek is to make his way to Nino's because Sean thinks that he is, in his mind, still stuck in that room with that girl. and he can't see himself like getting past that moment. So Derek is say, "Oh, hey, that's okay, man. Like, I'll just go and do this job by myself." All of a sudden, we have these brand new valets in front of Nino's, and Derek's like, "What the heck is going on?" Because Nino all of a sudden is to get this phone call from a guy named Kale that doesn't say his name is Kale, and he's like, "Hey, man, like I went and did a valet in your restaurant, and I come to find out that these guys are stealing from me. Like, how could they? I'm gonna file this report and this and that, and like, you better have all of your like workers on record there." So all of a sudden now Nino had fired these guys without them knowing and put other valets out there. So Derek is to now go on and beat up one of these valets because of how upset he is, and Sean eventually is to make it there to kind of break things up. And so Sean goes on and takes Derek back to his place, and we have it at one point where Kale is to call Sean and say, like, "Yeah, like, I'm not going to call the cops on you. I'm just going to correct you. I'm just going to correct what you had done to me." So now Sean realizes between him and Kale that things are on because Kale wants order, and so he's going to get it. So Sean eventually comes home to his parents to realize that both of his parents have somehow lost their jobs. That his father had been filed a report about him having like $10,000 worth of items that he supposedly like stole, all of a sudden just magically arrive in his vehicle, and so like he was busted for something. And his mother was suspended from her job, and so Sean is like, "Okay, now parents, I have to explain to you what exactly all happened, and so that way you guys can understand what's going on." So, and Sean's like, "Dad, I know you're gonna be ticked at me," so on and so Sean goes on and explains to his parents the whole story, everything, truth, and whatever, that he was stealing and he was a thief. So his parents are now to pack up everything that they have and get the heck out of there. And Sean's father is to kind of cock this gun and like, "Okay, well, like, we're gonna go on and we're gonna protect ourselves." And Sean, who no longer has the use of his own car because his own car like is to have every window broken out of it, and is to have all of his tires being flattened. Sean is to now borrow his father's car because he's going to go on and try to figure out what he can do to hopefully still have the chance to still save this girl, Katie. So we have Derek. We have Derek that is making his way home to his house and is to all of a sudden be calling for his parents, and his parents aren't answering. Derek goes back into his room to go on and find Kale there, and so Kale is to go on and knock this guy out, and then is to shoot him. And Sean is having a phone call with Derek during that time, and all of a sudden, I think accidentally, Derek was to hit this button for like a video call, and Sean's like, "Hey man, I'm driving, like I can't go on and do this video call." And Derek is like, what are you saying?" And then pop, Derek goes down. So we have Sean who is hearing the gunshot, and so Sean, of course, is to go on and call the police. But Kale makes the mistake of answering this video call, and immediately we have Sean who takes a screenshot of Kale in Derek's room So it's like, aha, like I have evidence of you being here and killing someone. So now we have it to where eventually Kale at one point is to tell Sean, like, man, that was smart with that whole video thing, right? That was pretty clever with that screenshot, but like, man, did that go nowhere in either. So Sean goes on and is to call the police, and he is to give this screenshot to these FBI guys who are doing this case. And now this FBI guy is saying, like, hey, like, we have this screenshot of Kale, and like, yeah, like, I think that there's some truth to what this kid is saying. I think there's something with this kid. So Kale, so we have to where these FBI guys are scrambling to look through all of these locations that Kale is to uh, possibly have in secret, all these parts of land and whatever. And Kale is starting to realize that he may get caught here. So Kale is at this cabin hiding out, eventually wanting to have this accountant transfer over $50,000 into some other account. And the accountant is saying, like, well, hey, what about your parents? And Kale is going on and saying, like, don't ever talk about my parents. Don't ever talk about them. So this all leads to having Sean, who is to go into his house and ask for his brother to have this kind of photo editing software. And so Sean is to look at this photo again and realize within the check that there's a different location or different address than the address of where Kale was living. So Sean tracks the address down and is to realize it's someplace in Sandy. So Sean now goes into Kale's home yet again, and while Kale is still back at this cabin, and so Sean is hoping that he's going to go on and again find this girl somewhere in this house because somebody wasn't looking good enough, or Sean is to confront Kale at this point. So, come to find out, Kale is to realize that Sean is there, and when Sean tries to escape, Kale is locking and unlocking all these doors. He's turning off and on all these electrical devices, and Kale is like, "Oh my god! Like, I don't think I can get out of this house." And also, Sean is listening to something ticking away, realizing that in this oven there is also a bomb that is ticking away on a timer. I guess something that Kale had remote detonated. So Sean is now scrambling into this garage, and he is getting this garage door opener, but the garage door opener isn't opening fast enough. So Sean is ramming through this garage door with this Maserati and is to get out of this house just in time before it explodes. So you would think by that time, like, the FBI would be hot on this trail of like, okay, there's something really going on with this place. There's something really wrong going on here. So Sean goes into this car and is to navigate where exactly Sandy is. So he drives to this location through this GPS and is to make it his way to this cabin that has this kind of like this key combination for him to get into. So he just goes through this gate and walks in there. So all that Sean has with him is these bolt cutters, and that's it. And in my brain, I'm like, why doesn't this guy have a gun? Why isn't this guy buying a gun? Like, he probably should know some shady people. He's the thief, right? Find some guys who deal guns and just quickly buy one. But I guess, like, when really looking at it, anyways, I guess it just wouldn't make sense, would it, for the story? So Sean makes it to this cabin and is going on and looking around all around this cabin, and is to, through one of the windows, take a bunch of screenshots, and he sees a woman getting closer and closer to this window, realizing that it's Katie. And so Sean is now telling Katie, like, I'm going to save you, like, I'll do it, like, this time around, I won't make that mistake. Because eventually Katie is going to get back at Sean in the most brilliant line to deliver in this movie. Oh my god. So Sean goes on and is to turn around and realize that Kale is right there, boom, with this shovel, and Sean is to get clocked a couple times and is to get knocked unconscious. So now, because Sean had gone on to open up this this little place that he goes and buries a bunch of bodies, and is going to shove Katie in this location. So Kale had gone on and done all these things with Katie. At one point, we have it to where Katie is to be missing a thing of silverware from her food, and Kale is to be upset with her to the point of her wanting to finally give back the silverware out of fear, and Kale is like, no breakfast. So now Kale is now dragging Katie, and weirdly he is having her with a bunch of like winter clothes on, as if he had like prepared her for being in this kind of weather condition, which is kind of weird. Like, hey, yeah, like put the warmest clothes on that you got somehow or another. Maybe he has killed a number of people and has collected a number of clothes, but still. So Katie is to go to the location of this hole, and Kale is waiting for Sean to wake up. And so when Sean finally wakes up, Kale is to want to make an example of Sean in the only way that he can, by wanting Kale to shoot Katie, which I don't even really understand, like, how Katie has blood on her when she falls, because it doesn't really seem like Kale shot anything. So Kale is a horrible shot. So Katie is to have seemed to have been shot. Katie falls over, and now Katie has lye all over her body. And so Kale is now telling Sean that he's going to be next. So we have it where Kale and Sean are having this conversation, and while that's happening, Sean is to notice that Katie is to drag herself out of this hole and is to run off. And so Sean is to feel like he's like, well, I finally did the right thing here. I finally saved this one girl. Whatever happens to me, because like this guy's life is really just over with anyways. Because like he is to be just all kinds of trouble. Everybody's life of his family that he's tied to is effed up or killed. So while this is all going on, we have the FBI who is tracking this cabin location, but they need a warrant to bust in here and really go into this cabin. So, because they're just stuck at this like gate location. So now we have Sean who's talking to Kale, arguing with him. And so we have it where Katie is to smack Kale over the head with the shovel, and Katie ends up yelling to Sean, "That's how you save someone!" And I'm like, heck yeah. Like, every single thing that Sean did to try to save this woman miserably failed, but Katie went on and saved Sean with a smack over the head with a shovel. And then she says, like, that's how you save somebody. And so now they have to realize, like, well, is he really dead? Like, we have to make sure. So all of a sudden, when they're going on and checking his body, come to find out he wakes back up. There's a tussle over um, this gun and a number of other things. So Sean and Katie just decide to go on and run through the forest. And the FBI agents are hearing a gunshot, so they're like, well, like, is that could be probable cause? And they're like, heck yeah. So they start running, they start making their way to this location. So Sean within this woods is to wildly just find this axe that he tries to take out of this trunk, and he just breaks off the handle, and he's like, fuck, I can't do anything right. So Sean is like, well, I guess I just have this handle. Like, that's going to be good enough, I guess. So Kale, again, is to find Katie within this woods, and he is going to kill her. He's going to shoot her. And Sean surprises Kale, smacks this gun out of his hand, and just starts beating him with this axe handle. And now we have it where Katie and Sean are like, well, like, you beat him, but that's not going to be good enough. And I'm thinking, like, put him in that hole. Shove him in that hole. Make it to where he can't get out of it, and he'll die. Like, that'll be, like, probably justice, right? But again, I don't know. So, but instead, when the FBI finally make it to this cabin a million years later, we have Katie, we have Sean who are there, and they tell their tale. And we have now Kale, who is tied up like Katie was in the beginning of the first time that we saw Katie. Kale is now tied up and gagged and tied up and chained and everything like that. And so the FBI guys are like, okay, like, we got this one. So really, finally, that's just kind of like the end of it all. Wouldn't it have been nice if at the end of all this, like, Katie and Sean would have ended up like being a couple? Because really, when thinking about it, Sean has nobody else at the end of this story. He is not going to go on and have Riley. Like, that ship has sailed, even though maybe when he comes to find out to be some kind of hero, and like Sean writes a book about this whole thing, about this whole event, and makes quite a bit of money off of it. Maybe Riley would just go and be like, oh, I didn't know. Like, yeah, you didn't. Yeah. That's how I would have written the end of this movie, to just have Riley, who is to all of a sudden be this massive hero, and Riley watches it on TV, and she didn't know any better. And so, like, Riley is calling Sean by the end of this film after she gets that tube out of her mouth. And then that's how they end the movie. Like, that's how, like, in my mind, they end the film. Anyways, with that said, I'm going to end this review and get back out of here. I realized that this was an hour, but I enjoyed this movie anyways. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.